Hello! Welcome back to the cruel, brutal, capitalist dictatorship of Kuala Lumpur. I hope you're having an amazing day. Because if you're having an amazing day, I'm having an amazing day. And if I'm having an amazing day, you should be having an amazing day. Alright, today's going to be another run and talk video. It's too hot outside to be running outside, so I'm running in the gym car park. It is good to do 40 to 50 minutes of cardio before you lift weights. It's not only good for your muscle recovery, but it's also great for warming up your body before the pump. Yes. Now, let's begin with today's video. But before we start, please click the subscribe button, and thank you very much. Now, a fairly common criticism by many of the white-collar intelligentsia in Asia and Africa is that, yes, while socialism and socialist ideals are indeed admirable, Marxism is an outdated European colonial ideology, which is quite simply an extension of colonialism, because Karl Marx was a white European man who did not speak any Asian or African languages, did not come from any Asian or African culture, and never lived in any Asian or African society. So, according to these people, Marxism should be treated in the same way as any other colonial European ideology, as irrelevant to Asia and Africa. And it's a fairly common criticism in the decolonial circles, in which people like to parrot the notion of Asian values, or African values, or Native American values. Identity politics, when you don't want to consider another person's point of view because that person is simply different from you. You see, why do we have to divide people into white, Asian, and African anyway? I mean, it's all so tiresome. And that's exactly the same kind of logic that people in the East and people in Africa have, those undialectical idealists, when they see Marx, a German man who doesn't speak any Asian or African language. They think, oh, this man cannot be taken seriously, and this person has no relevance to Asia or Africa because he doesn't happen to come from the same background or the same cultural upbringing as myself. Anyway, why does an idea have to come from the East in order for it to be applicable in the East? A good idea is a good idea regardless of where it came from or who said it. If Adolf Hitler said that 1 + 1 = 2, does that make it 3? Not that I'm comparing Marx to Hitler, because Marx was the Jew that Hitler hated the most. But you see what happens when you indulge in identity politics and miss the bigger picture? You end up sacrificing good ideas simply because you don't like where they came from. It is on your head if the Global South or any particular Global South country you may come from cannot progress because you refuse to engage with Karl Marx because of your stupid anti-Westernism. Because I'm willing to engage with anyone, regardless of who that person may be. Heck, I'm willing to even engage Firdaus Wong and invite him to my channel if he'll come. I know I'll be called a race traitor. I already am called a race traitor because I'm not Chinese enough for many people in KL's taste. But yes, I'm happy to engage with all sorts of ideas because I'm not some closed-minded nincompoop who keeps his head in the sand. Anyway, was Karl Marx Eurocentric? Well, he most certainly was, like most Victorians of his time. Well, yes, he was quite progressive compared to the average genocidal Victorian, Like even Charles Dickens wanted to genocide the Indians, and Winston Churchill was quite happy to let millions of Indians starve. Marx was quite progressive for his time, but nonetheless, let's be frank, he did have biases, as we all do, and he did have Western-centric biases. For example, he told an Indian socialist in a letter that he should not focus on the outmoded works of Eastern scholars, and he should instead study the modern philosophies of the West. And in the Communist Manifesto, he quite palpably states that yes, the bourgeoisie has basically battered down the barbarian Chinese walls, and it has brought the barbarian nations into civilization. I'm paraphrasing, but that's what he was saying. And yes, Marx did describe, the historical materialist view of the world. Marx did split the world into various stages, with basically barbarism, followed by slave society, and then feudalism, and then capitalism, and then socialism, and finally communism. So yes, Marx did regard most non-European cultures as being either in the feudal or barbaric mode of production. So yes, Marx's views were somewhat Eurocentric. But guess what? So was Isaac Newton. Oh, now you can't subscribe to the theory of gravity because Isaac Newton was a Euro-chauvinist. You can't subscribe to the theory of relativity because Albert Einstein was a racist. You can't subscribe to Confucianism because Confucius told you not to cut your hair, which I'm sure most of you do in the modern age. Most of you aren't keeping long hair, are you? I'm a Confucian, even though I don't speak Chinese, and I know that rubs a lot of people the wrong way. And no, Islam did not come from Southeast Asia either. It came from the Arabian world. Are we to stop using paper because paper is a Chinese invention? Are we to stop using Arabic numerals because Arabic numerals came from Arabia and not from the non-Arab world? Are we to stop using the Roman alphabet because the Roman alphabet came from Italy? You see what this all boils down to. Meaningless identity politics, born out of crude idealism more than anything else. See, 5 or 6 years ago, I used to be like those people before I discovered dialectical materialism, before I discovered Karl Marx. Yes, I also used to believe that the West was barbaric, savage, and degenerate, and I used to believe that the East was moral, spiritual, and philosophically advanced. Yes, I too subscribed to the false consciousness of chauvinism, or the belief that myself and my peer people are different from people in other parts of the world. And yes, even though Marx did have some Eurocentric beliefs, it was Marx who liberated me from this chauvinism and liberated me from this idea that East is East and West is West and twain shall never meet. Because it was Marx who said, the workers of the world have no country. So no matter which society you come from, whether you come from Arabia, whether you come from China, whether you come from Italy, whether you come from Malaysia or Singapore or Brunei, it doesn't matter. The workers of the world, regardless of what culture they practice or what language they speak, all are in the same boat and they all share a common destiny. The historical role that the proletariat will play of seizing power from the capitalist ruling class. Yes, the bourgeoisie, the capitalist class, do not care what culture they are, or what language they speak, or what religion they practice. The capitalist class cares only about one thing and one thing only: sheer naked profit at everyone else's expense. But they want you to be race conscious. They want you to be culture conscious. They want you to think that you have nothing in common with a worker from a different society who speaks a different language. And that is why I'm so fucking angry at these sectarians. But for my own race, what's happening is that there seems to be a sectarian divide between the bananas, or the Chinese who are yellow on the outside and white on the inside. I hate that term. And the real Chinese, the worthy Chinese, who can speak Chinese and who are Chinese enough for everyone else's taste. It seems that these identity politic warriors, these white-collar sectarians, are trying to, you'll see plenty of them on Laoyat Forum, they're trying to breed divisions between us. They want the Chinese workers to distrust and hate the bananas and regard the bananas as their enemies, when the real enemy of the Chinese working class is the Chinese capitalist. In the same way, the real enemy of the Malay working class is the Malay capitalist, and the real enemy of the Indian working class is the Indian capitalist. That is your enemy, not the bananas, not the workers of other races, and certainly not people from the West who are also struggling proletariat like yourselves. But you wouldn't know that if you didn't read Karl Marx. And it's funny because the people who do decolonial studies at Western universities do tend to be the exploitative class from their own respective societies. Now, first of all, I have to state that class is not destiny. You cannot disavow your own material conditions at will. It's called being a class traitor. Like Lenin was from the elite class, as was Karl Marx. But these men, just like Luigi Mangione, chose to side with the downtrodden, the oppressed, by going against their class interests. Well, the fact of the matter is that most of these decolonial activists or these Asian values activists tend to come from the exploitative class in their own respective societies. And when they say Asian values or African values, this is really just a cover for their reactionary politics and their prevention of their own working class from uniting with the working class of other nations and societies. Take Lee Kuan Yew, for example, the Asian values guy. Even though technically he regarded anyone who wasn't East Asian to be an Untermensch, right? Well, Lee Kuan Yew loved to parrot the Asian values mantra, the idea that Asians don't want freedom, Asians don't want democracy, and Asian society is a very hierarchical society, even though it was Chairman Mao who basically got rid of the landlords. And historically, Chinese society has not been about class collaboration, but about class struggles. You know, historically, peasants have always risen up against oppressive tyrants in Chinese society. And, you know, that's like saying that Hang Jebat, you know, the revolutionary leader of Malacca, whose grave I visit several times a year, was not a true Asian because he defied the cruel Sultan. Well, Lee Kuan Yew, Mr. Asian values man, who basically encouraged people to study their language and get in touch with their Asian heritage because you will never be white. Well,
this man during colonial times was answering to Lord Selkirk. Yes, this man who called himself an anti-colonial fighter was sipping tea and brandy with the colonizers during colonial times. But after the colonizers left, because it was thanks to the efforts of the socialist leaders like Jinping, who kicked out the colonizers, these people swept in and claimed credit. And then they claimed to be following Asian values. But if you look at Lee Kuan Yew's ideology, which was a very race hierarchical ideology and a very hierarchical elitist ideology, you see it has less with Confucianism. It has less to do with Confucianism and more to do with Prussian Bismarckian ideology. And funnily enough, those decolonial Asian values or African values people who claim that there are inherent differences between white people and Asian people or white people and African people are fundamentally agreeing with the colonizers. They are agreeing that Easterners or Africans are fundamentally different from white people, and that, they shouldn't have the right to access the same things that Western people have. Like a lot of Eastern societies, for example, have banned Marxism. Eastern reactionaries like Lee Kuan Yew, for example, or the Malaysian authorities try their best to stifle Marxist theory. And their logic for doing so is that communism or socialism, rather than being modes of production, are in fact Western ideologies that have no place in Asia. And yet these are the very same people, these decolonial types, these Asian values or African values types, are the very same people who will put on a Western suit and have tea with the colonizers behind everyone's back while claiming to speak for everyone in their society. Look at China, for example. Now, you could say that China is a Marxist society. Of course, a century ago, China was dirt poor, suffering under the century of humiliation, and even worse off than India was at that time. Look at China today. Thanks to the guiding power of Marxism-Leninism, China not only pulled itself up by its bootstraps, but did capitalism better than the capitalists, to the extent that the United States is growing green with envy. Yes, I know that I get called a self-hating Chinese a lot by diaspora types, but I do have a lot of friends from China who don't reduce my identity to that of a Chinese person, okay? But anyway, China would be a lot worse off than India today if China had not employed the guiding principles of Marxism and Leninism in order to mobilize their forces of production. If China had followed India's route and gone the decolonial route and rejected Marxism for Hindu mysticism, why, China would be even worse off than India today. If Russia had not had Lenin, they would still be a poor and illiterate country. Lenin destroyed centuries of poverty and serfdom, and he made Russia one of the most literate and educated societies in the world within a few short years. And that had not been achieved under any other Russian leader until Lenin. That is also thanks to the guiding force of Marxism-Leninism. A lot of socialists feel very proud and emotional when they imagine what it must have been like to be a Russian soldier liberating Berlin and planting the communist flag in Russia and defeating Hitler. That was also due to the guiding force of Marxism and Leninism. It has historically been proven that when you have the guiding force of Marxism and Leninism on your side, you win. And let's talk about Vietnam. I find it to be the epitome of hypocrisy and the epitome of irony that American soldiers who fought against the communists in Vietnam, who fought against the ideology of Marxism and Leninism, are now retiring in Vietnam because Vietnam has far, far better healthcare than America. So it has been tried and proven that when you reject identity politics and you engage with ideas that work, regardless of where they come from, that means that your society will improve. And the Chinese people are living in their best century ever. And if you were to tell them that it's not because of Marxism, you were to tell them that it's because of the Chinese people, it's got nothing to do with Marx, they would laugh at you. Because the Chinese people are able to critique Marx, they're able to accept that, yes, while Marx was not perfect, he wasn't an angel, he did have certain views that are not compatible today with Asia today. They didn't just dismiss him as a Western colonial philosopher. They cynified or cynicized Marx and basically turned him into one of their ideological figures, alongside people like Confucius or Mencius or people like that. So, in conclusion, the people who claim that they reject Marxism or they reject good ideas that come from the West because of the fact that these ideas did not come from the East, or these ideas did not come from Africa, these people are exactly what we mean by reactionaries. People, even if they call themselves progressive, because they refuse to accept progress, they refuse to accept what is good, what has been proven to be good for all societies on a universal basis. And they reject it in the same way one might reject gravity, because gravity came from a white man. So, yes, Marxism, is not an ideology. It is basically a way of organizing society. Just like Charles Darwin analyzed the evolution of nature, Karl Marx analyzed the evolution of human society and gifted us with the gift of dialectical materialism. And we could progress. Malaysia could progress to become a first world country if Malaysian progressives would get that stick out of their ass and actually engage with scary white man ideas like Marxism. So yeah, thank you very much. That's all I have to say today. And happy iftar. Selamat berbuka puasa. Bye bye.